Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Wandering to Wellbeing, where we share some self-care basic habits to help you in these challenging times. Also pleased to be part of Team Bath's Stay In Work Out activity timetable. We're Reason to Be. We try and help people thrive rather than to survive. And in today's episode of Wandering to Wellbeing, we're going to focus on social wellbeing. So hopefully some top tips that can help you with that. I'm going to kick off with just talking a little bit around structure and spontaneity around social well-being. We know psychologically routine and rituals are very important to our well-being and our psychological health. And I guess those have been quite challenged in the current situation for a whole host of reasons. I think one of the things that I've observed is generally the ambiguity around the current situation about COVID-19, but also the ambiguity and unpredictability about how we're living and working together. So I guess one of the challenges for us is to try and balance an element of certainty in our home work environment, which is the same thing as well as our educational environment, but also to try and keep boredom at bay. And let's be frank, everyone, sort of the novelty is wearing off a little bit now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I think one of the things to think about, and we've talked about this in other episodes, is to try and structure your week to give you a little bit more predictability, a little bit more certainty, a little bit more of a routine and metronome, I guess. So that applies to social activities. And as I said, we're working, we're educating, we're socialising, we're parenting, we're familying, all in the same environment. So trying to get a little bit of rhyme and rhythm around that is really useful. So what we'd suggest is just trying to think about your week and just put a flexible structure around that, so everybody sort of knows what we're doing. We know human beings are individuals, so everyone's got their own preferences, and in your own environment, that'll be true as well. So it's trying to accommodate everybody's needs. Equally, you might be by yourself. So it's how do you pepper your week in a structured way with social activities that you can bring into your home. One of the things to think about also is that spontaneity as well. So if it's too structured, too rigid, it's going to become even more boring, even if you're a structured person. So try and bring moments of spontaneity to all of that as well. I think one of the things to think about is your eating routines. So I was talking to somebody the other day who's said they're bored with having every meal together with their family and kids every night. And I just said, well, why don't you just take a night off? Why don't you get other people to cook? Or why don't you just have a complete break from each other, eat in different rooms, etc. So part of it's trying to mix it up during the week as well as having that structure. Equally, some people are choosing not to eat together. So it's trying to make it work for yourself and your environment. I think the other thing is to think about alone versus loneliness. So it's okay to be alone for a lot of people, but equally being with loads of people can make you lonely. So it's just trying to think about how do you protect your alone time and how do you protect other people's alone time, and giving each other permission to be like that. And I think the longer this goes on, the more that's going to have an impact, really. So it's trying to protect your time, their time, and as well as together time as well, and thinking creatively. And I think now is a good time to think about that because we've been doing this for a reasonable amount of time, really. I think just switching routines and activities. So I don't know who's doing the cleaning in your household, but think about that. Who does that? Think about cooking. So if some of your family have never cooked, maybe it's time to learn and to be a little bit creative with that as well. I think one of the other techniques that we've thought about as well is putting social ideas into a pot, where you just pick one out spontaneously and you do that activity. So it could be literally 5 minutes dancing in the kitchen, playing a certain board game, watching a movie together, but also trying to have something more routine during the week. So is Friday night family night? Is Saturday night family night? And if you're by yourself, how do you get people to engage with you to say, look, every Friday I'd like a friend to come into my house, etc. So just some quick sort of tools and techniques to think about in terms of structure and spontaneity. What I'm going to do is hand over to Aurea now, and she's going to talk about some more top tips around social wellbeing. Aurea, over to you.
Thanks very much, Keith. So as we're all spending a lot more time together than we might normally be, especially at a time of quite a lot of heightened emotion for lots of people, the other thing that when it comes to our social well-being that we might like to consider is also just being in agreement with the people that you're currently sharing your space with, perhaps more so than ever, about how you're going to be together, how you need to behave and show up so that you can make that as positive as possible and avoid any pitfalls. So it might be that you actually want to talk about and agree what you might describe as sort of house rules or family values. So this is about, are there maybe specific behaviors that you're going to engage in or not engage in? It might be more attitudinal. It might be about bringing a positive attitude to a particular task or chore, or it might be a general way of being. It might be about assuming good intent in terms of other people's behavior at this point. So it's whatever's relevant to you and the people around you, but it's about making explicit rather than leaving things to be implicit, and making sure that we're all in agreement so that we can all try then and do our best at these challenging times to make our social environment a really positive one. And as part of doing that, you might want to consider what is sometimes described as hot buttons. So these are the things that get the best out of us, but also they're the things that can wind us up. And if I'm aware of those things for the people around me, then I can potentially just be very aware and very sort of cognizant of, accommodating those and being careful around them. Or it might even lead to specific actions or behaviours that we agree on so that we don't fall into those pitfalls. So one thing that my husband and I have found is that we are more so than we've ever been before, both in the house when one or the other of us is cooking, which is quite unusual. And what we were finding is that when I was started a meal I was cooking and my husband came in, he would often, in intending to be helpful, get involved and start doing things. But for me, that was a bit of a hot button, because for me, I was interpreting that as interfering, and it was sort of winding me up a little bit. So where we've got to now is the agreement is if I'm cooking and he comes in the kitchen, it's just the question is, how can I help? So that we just agree what that looks like. And that's just been a useful sort of tip for us. And the other thing is also about not letting small things that might be minor irritations escalate. So what you might start off with is like a bit like a pebble in your shoe, a very small thing that you're hardly aware of. But if you don't pay attention to it, you don't do anything about it, it can build up until it becomes something that's a bit more of a big deal, maybe even leading to a bit of a disagreement or an argument. So it's best just to try and nip these things in the bud early on, to speak out, to have just an open conversation around things that are potentially going to end up winding you up before they get to that point. And the other thing I think that's useful to remember at these times is to be really graceful if you do end up potentially in a disagreement situation. And also, to be mindful about how the people are experiencing things at the moment. And also to, just as a reminder for yourself, that you don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. So actually for you and for the person, it might be more helpful just to walk away. So just thinking about and being just a bit more aware of how we can interact, how we can connect with people around us and be together so it's as positive as it can be right now. And also thinking about how you can combine your social time with other things that you're trying to achieve. So it doesn't just feel like one more thing that you're trying to accommodate in your schedule. As Keith said, lots of things going on at the moment, lots of different demands right now. So how can we combine it? Can we do projects or tasks together that we want to get done around the house or in the garden? Can we use it to sort of celebrate things that have gone well, achievements that we want to sort of celebrate together? It's about thinking sort of creatively around how you can build in your social time during the week, but in a way that also means that it's helpful to all the other things that are also part of what we're all trying to get done right now. And if we also think about the connections and the sort of social landscape for us outside of our immediate environment, so not just those people who we're currently sharing a space with, it's good to think about all of the social networks that we're part of. And they might well be extended family or friends. Obviously, colleagues might be relevant. Maybe interest groups or social clubs. So in thinking about that structure of your social time across the whole week, across a particular day, it's useful just to think about where you want to sort of show up in relation to all of those social networks. So you can think about how you want to spend the time that's available to you. So there may well be networks where you can look to people for support. So are there particular individuals who really lift your spirits? Are there people who you know are great if you want a bit of banter? Equally, are there people from a practical perspective? Is there an IT whiz out there in your network somewhere that might help with some of the technical difficulties or practical things that you're doing? So quick example, my husband and I, at the beginning of lockdown, we started growing some vegetables, which we've never really done before. So in our networks, we've been looking for people who've got a much better understanding of growing veg. Keith is now, as well as being a good friend, Keith is also my go-to man when it comes to potato growing. So looking at how you can get support, but also, obviously, all our social networks, our connections are a two-way street. So it's also thinking about where can you show up in those networks, because you can provide support, you can be of help and assistance to other people, you can help people who are going through a hard time or finding things difficult or need a bit of a lift. So it's about thinking about how you can use your connections to help everybody socially. And there may also be new social connections that are more important to us right now that we perhaps haven't put as much emphasis on before because we're involved in new activities. So maybe there are interest groups, if you like, or sets of people whereby there's a similar challenge. So caring for elderly relatives right now, or homeschooling a particular age, or dealing with the boredom of being furloughed. So potentially there are networks that you might want to strengthen or to extend because your needs have changed. And again, it's about showing up to share ideas, support other people, but maybe also just have a laugh and sort of get some humor about the difficulty because it's something that you're all very close to at the moment. And I think the other thing that we just need to be very sort of aware of, because we're all in very different environments at home, when we're reaching out and trying to connect to people that aren't in that immediate environment, we need to make sure that the communication works for both parties, really. So thinking about when in the day is helpful, not just for you, but also for them. Also thinking about how, so if someone's doing a lot of home working at the moment, another Zoom call may not be the thing that they want to engage in, and a telephone call, or a little WhatsApp chat might be better. So thinking about not just what works for you, but also thinking about what works for the other person. And not just around the sort of the what in terms of the mechanics of it, but also the what in terms of the topics you might talk about. So there might be certain individuals right now that are finding certain things difficult. So they either do or don't, want to connect with you to talk about that. Maybe they just want to have a laugh and have a joke, or maybe they actually do want you to be a shoulder to cry on. And equally, there might be topics that you want to be avoiding. And it's about feeling okay to say, actually, I'd rather not talk about that. I don't want to go there, rather than feeling like you've got to go with, what's helpful for the other person. So it's always about a two-way street. And it's just about making sure it's working for everybody in this very different social environment that we currently find ourselves in.
Thanks, Aurea. Some great top tips there for our social well-being. A few things from me just to close this session. I think one of the things that we know and you hear often is hindsight's a great thing. And sometimes what we'd say is we wish we'd done this, wish we'd done that. One of the things I think that in this situation is just think about how you want to treat people. So I guess in your home, in your work environment, your educational environment, is think about saying thank you more often. Say, I love you more often. And let's be frank, we all get grumpy, particularly in this time and challenging situation we're in. So think about saying, I'm sorry a little bit more. It doesn't cost us anything, small acts, but actually they make so much difference. And I think also just think about doing a few random acts of kindness for those people in your immediate social environment, if you're with people, or those outside of it as well. And I think particularly thinking about those people that are alone at the moment, and what very simple random acts can you do? It doesn't cost us a lot of money, if anything, and actually they mean a lot. I think one of the things to think about is control the controllables. So we've talked a lot about this. So on some of the things we've talked about today is just think about what you can do, rather than what you can't do, and do some of that. And remember to try and build into your 45 minutes and 15 minutes focus and recharge some social things. So the occasional text to people that you may not have been in touch with. So that's all our top tips on social well-being. What we're going to do is close this session. I think one of the things to remember, guys, is well-being is not just one thing. So loads of top tips on social well-being. Hopefully they've been useful. But remember, well-being is about more than that. And it's about emotional, nutritional, physical, mental, and actually the social things we've just covered. So thank you very much for listening to this episode, which has been on social well-being, and some top tips for your self-care. Think about how you can build those into your hourly routine. And thank you for listening. Look forward to seeing you soon.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.